Well, hello again. It's just me getting ready to do another episode. You guys will meet an incredible, talented human being. I can't wait. So,
Hi.
hi, gorgeous. How are you?
It's so good to see you. I'm good.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Oh my God, I cannot. There are no words to express to you my gratitude. You didn't know me, you didn't know my son, but you knew my brother and you trusted him. And for you and Russ to let this person, this little person, move into your home, for you to allow him to stay with you. So
Yeah, of
thank you for
course,
being there. Thank you
of
for
course.
being there. I love you for that. I'll
I,
never, ever, ever forget that.
yeah, that was such like a great time. I mean, it was so raw, obviously, for
Yeah.
Nick and having him come out to LA and, us having that dialogue. Like Russell and I were like, of course he can come here, like bring him out here. Be in that household
Yeah.
where we were like grown men, gay, having these lives and work and
Yeah.
sobriety. Russell isn't sober, but he was around and still is around a lot of sober people. So he has a dialogue and an understanding of that. But to just have Nick there and sort of like embrace him in that way and just sort of be like, this is what your life can be. Not saying that he wanted our life, but just
Right.
sort of like, a big life and, open and sober and all of that was sort of like such a
Yes.
great inspiration, I think,
Yes, absolutely. So thank
during
you
that
for that.
time. Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Mm.
But the reason for this whole thing is I don't think I've ever heard your whole story. I don't,
Woo!
I know that you turned 20 in August. Oh my
Yeah.
God, that is just crazy. On my mom's birthday, that's how I remember it. We got that little connection. And I don't know, I don't know if you came in one time and one time only. I don't know what got you there, but if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your story with everyone, that would be
Of
lovely.
course. Of course. So I did not come in one time and time only. I am definitely a chronic relapser, and
Okay.
that's part of my story. And my story with AA started off when I was 15 years old. Was the first time that I was introduced to AA, and I was introduced to AA through. I was put into a mental institution for trying to commit suicide.
Okay.
And I had taken my father's gun and played Russian roulette with myself 3 times. And at that time, I had a therapist and I had told her what I had done. And there was an immediate meeting with my parents and a talk about putting me into a hospital for trying to commit suicide.
Okay.
So while I was in the hospital, there were these meetings that people were going to, and I decided to go to them just to have something to do. And when I started going to the meetings, what I heard at that time, I learned how to become very sneaky with my drinking. I learned how, like, because there were all of these older people. I was 15, so there were probably people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc.
Okay.
And I was listening to them tell these like really horrific stories and what they did. And as you know, being in a meeting, people will tell stories, and then all of a sudden there's all this laughter. It could be like this really horrific story, but I learned how to be sneaky. That's what I learned from being in there. So when I came out of that institution, I had been sober for a little bit, and I decided then that I would go to, actually a friend of mine in high school was going to meetings. So I would go with him to these meetings. And the only reason why I was going was because I was like cruising the older men. I was, coming, I was, my identity, I was actually, discovering my identity and being gay and the attraction to older men. And I would go there and just sort of like stare at these older guys and just like be like, whatever. And so from 15 until I was 20, I went in and out of the rooms. I would get 60 days, 30 days, etc. You know the story. You've seen people like that coming in and out of the rooms. And that's what my experience with sobriety was. I went for every other reason than to actually get sober.
Okay.
I didn't do any steps. I didn't do anything like that. I did not do the work. So I moved into Boston when I was 18. Prior to that, I was living on the New Hampshire border. So I was like an hour north of Boston. And then I moved into Boston, and when I was 18 until I was 22, I still went in and out of meetings because, as you know, once you start hearing about sobriety, it sort of like screws with your drinking, right? So every time I would like come out of a blackout or I would do something really bad, I'd be like, oh my God, I have to get sober. So I had this relationship with the rooms where I would go into the rooms and cause a scene, throw chairs, so that I wouldn't have to connect to the meetings. They would say, John, you have to leave the meeting, but you can come back next week. Like that sort of dialogue always followed me because I was not willing. And that's really what it came down to, is that I wasn't willing to do the work. I wasn't willing to, do any steps or get a sponsor, because I was like, at the time, 15 to 22, I was like, I can figure this out. I don't need to do this through AA.
Mhm.
So I would get really small time, periods of time. I think probably the most time up until then that I had was probably like 90 days. And then I would always sort of like go out and drink or do drugs. Drugs are a big part of my story. And then when I was 22, I got accepted into college. And I knew that if I was going to make it through this experience of going to college, that I had to do it sober, that there was no way that I could do it drinking. Like I was not going to be able to do it. So I decided that I would get sober, but I also decided that I would never step foot in an AA meeting room again. So for 4 years, I stayed sober. I was a dry drunk, as we've heard that term. And I have to tell you, like, I owned that. Like, I was such a, I mean, you thought I met you. You should have seen me when I was 22 and dry and girl.
Oh my God, I know. It's the white knuckling it. I'm doing it, so leave me alone,
Yeah.
but we're so miserable. We're so miserable, but we're not drinking,
Yeah.
and I've had this conversation before. We're not drinking, we're not doing drugs. What else do you want? Leave me alone. I could do this myself. It's the
Mhm.
control thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, for me, I guess it was also like, it was still like my ego was so inflated that I was going to find the way to do it myself. And that, at the time, I hadn't found anybody that that I was inspired by. There was nobody that I was like, I want their sobriety, because my ego was so big. The only thing that I saw were the differences. The only thing that my ego allowed me to do was keep everybody at a hand's distance away from me, because I was in so much pain, you know what I mean? And I didn't want to admit that. And I wasn't willing to allow anybody into, my personal space.
Mm-hmm.
So for those 4 years, I stayed sober, but I did not change. I didn't have any tools. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't have any of the things that when we commit to getting sober and do the program, we have all of a sudden this instant community, right? Like that's what is sort of gifted to us. And I didn't have any of that. What I had was an inflated ego, an attitude, like I had, a chip on my shoulder. I was very judgmental, all of those things. And I was in a lot of pain. I came from a really, background, and that's not why why I'm an alcoholic, but all of that stuff allowed me to drink at everything that had happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, 4 years later, I was in this relationship with this guy that I was trying to break up with. Everybody wanted me to stay with him because he did not drink and he did everything different than I did. And everyone thought, oh, he's great for you. He's different. He's not a partier, blah, blah, blah. So I stayed with him because of those reasons, which is not a good reason to stay with anybody, as we know, but I did. And then 2 years into our relationship, he came home and said, I'm going to move to New York City. And I said, I'll move with you. So we moved to New York City. And the night that we got here in New York City, I decided to drink because, again, I didn't have the community of people to talk to. I didn't have, the foundation of being sober. I didn't have anything to do with AA whatsoever. I hadn't drank. But my mind told me, you haven't drank or done any drugs for 4 years. If you just don't do drugs and you drink appropriately, you'll be okay. I thought I can drink and I can drink and I won't be a mess. So the night I moved to New York City, I drank, I ended up in a blackout. I beat my boyfriend up and I stole his wallet. And that was after not drinking for 4 years.
Wow.
So that was a lot of information for me to know that my disease, I use the word disease now because, I have the lingo. At the time, I wasn't calling it a disease. I was like, oh my God, like, I feel like I have been drinking this whole time. Like, it was just like crazy. It built up and it just all came out, everything, all that pent up everything. And I just, went on drinking for, I think it was 3 years maybe. And I was a mess. I was like coming out of blackouts on rooftops in New York City. I had no clothes on at times. I came out of blackouts having sex with cab drivers. It took me a long time to admit that I put myself in situations that were dangerous and that I could have ended up dead. And every single time it scared the living, it scared me so much because I knew that it's in my blood. I know how strong this disease is in my family. And I knew that if I continued on, that I was going to end up dead. It petrified me, but I could not stop. I had an intervention. I think it was 3 years into drinking. I had an intervention. My best friend, Cindy, and my boyfriend at the time sat me down. I had been up in Boston. I was in a terrible blackout. I came out of it in an intervention around a table at like 1:00 in the morning. And I was like, what's going on? You're all attacking me. I didn't know that I had been in an intervention. So anyways, I agreed.
Oh, man.
And this was, this time around, I went back just to like make everybody happy. I didn't think that I would get sober, but they said either, you get sober again and you can't be in our lives, like you're a mess. And this is like, we're setting a boundary with you. And no one had ever done that to me before. No one had sat me down and said, you're a mess and you're affecting our lives this way. And that if you don't pull it together, that you're not going to be in our lives. And that was like, oh shit, I better take this serious. But even with that said, like, I didn't plan on going to an AA meeting and staying. I thought, I'm going to go to an AA meeting. I'll sober up for a little bit. Everyone will see how great I'm doing. And then that will be it. And, we drove back to New York. And when we got back, my boyfriend at the time had a meeting list and said, I've been going to Al-Anon. And I was like, oh, like, real, like if someone's going to Al-Anon, they all have the lingo and you're like screwed. I was like, oh my God. So I looked at the meeting list and there was a meeting at 9th Avenue in New York City. I think it was like at 6:00 and I went to the meeting. And, all honesty, the same thing happened to me that when I was 15 to 22, there was a really cute guy in the room. I was like, okay, I can do this. And I started following him to meetings. And that's really what got me back to coming to the meetings, was just sort of like, and I had a boyfriend at a time. So I had a boyfriend and I'm following this other guy around in the rooms. Hello, I was such a mess. And, long story short is that, I started going to these meetings in the East Village in New York City, and I saw this group of guys, this guy, Johnny and Peter, and, there's probably like 5 of them, and they were like really cool. They were like East Village guys. They were artists and hairstylists. And I thought, if these guys can do it, I can do it. Like, I was so inspired by them to be like, they have these huge lives and they're artistic. And it's what I was striving to be in my life, but I was such a mess that everything had fallen apart. Like, I'm a photographer. I wouldn't carry a camera around because I thought I would lose it. Because, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like, I was a disaster. So I just made a commitment to myself. I got a sponsor and I committed an actual commitment to the program for 90 days. And I have to say, like, those 90 days, there was a shift. There was like a little moment of grace that I received, that I was like, okay, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get sober this time, because I had never done the work. I had never got a sponsor. I had never done the steps. I had never said that no matter what, I'll stay sober. And I made a commitment to myself that no matter what, I was going to stay sober. The other part of that is that right before I made that commitment, my cousin Johnny died. and he was 42, and he was drinking beer under a bridge in my hometown, and he died. And I always held like the line when I crossed it to how Johnny was. And for me, when Johnny died, I knew that could be my destiny. I knew that I could die drinking beer under a bridge. And that was a real wake up call for me. And to be like, I'm going to do it for Johnny. I'm going to do it for myself. Like I was really scared because of that. You know what I mean? Like, I just knew that was in my blood. Like, that's where my drinking was going to take me. Like, if I was willing to put myself in situations of coming out of blackouts, having sex with like taxi drivers and on top of rooftops and fighting and being arrested multiple times, coming out of blackouts in jail, not knowing if I had killed somebody. Like, if all of that didn't scare me into getting sober, it was Johnny's passing that scared me, because it was so real and it was so like close to home. So I had made that commitment to join the No Matter What Club. And, I've never lost sight of that. And, that was the gift that I got from Johnny, was to like his passing, his death of, his alcoholism, his disease. At his funeral, people had told me that he was always at AA meetings and he just couldn't get it. And, I had to take a look at that, and I had to like look at my story, that how I always compared myself to him, and then my not willing to get sober and not choosing, right? Like, it's a choice.
Yeah.
It's a choice. And
Absolutely.
I think that was something that really stood out for me, is that it was a choice for me to get sober and to stay sober, that at any time I could pick up and drink. And I had that history with AA as well, moving to New York and picking up the night I got here and thinking it was going to be different, and it wasn't. It was terrible, terrible. And the things that I did within those 3 years are horrific. And, it's taken me a really long time. It took me a long time to really be honest to people and say, this is what I did. And, there was a lot of pain in that, but being willing to work through that has allowed me to like get really grounded in my foundation of AA. So that was like what happened. There's a lot of things that happened within all of those years. But, this time when I came back, I was 28. I was in a lot of pain. And I had just a glimpse of willingness, is really what I had, that I really hadn't had before. Before, I would go to meetings to cause trouble. I really would. Yeah. I was like, this is cool. I can go here, and I would go drunk. I would sit in the back of the room, cause trouble, like that kind of stuff. Okay. And my journey is my journey. And like I said, I was a chronic relapser. And when Nick came to,
Okay.
When Nick was coming to LA, like, I knew that pain. You know what I mean? Like, that pain of being alone and just thinking like, you being so sick of being sick and tired and not thinking that there's really an option. And, I remember very clearly when Nick was coming to LA, I thought, I'm going to be that group of guys for Nick that I needed. You know what I mean? At that time.
Thank you.
And that's like, I remember that so clearly, like in talking to Johnny and Russell and just being like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help him out. And I meant that, you know what I mean? Like, it was such like a moment in time, like a reflection for myself of being like, not knowing and being so scared, but being willing. And Nick had that, like, he had such a little tiny bit of that. And, it just reminded me of my moving to New York and finding that group of people and, having that little bit of willingness. And, it was such a moment in time. I related to his story, and then my story. It was such a reflection of me and what I had gone through as well. So, I guess that's also what the program does, is like, we can find our community, we can find the people that inspire us. And, you got that through your brother as well. Then you went home and you found, your community as well and your voice. And I love that about, we never for me, I never gave myself the space or the ability to really see bigger of what sobriety was going to gift me. You know what I mean? I always took for granted of just being like a messy drunk and
Yeah.
causing trouble and being
Yeah.
like, so I wanted to be the rebel. I wanted to push the boundaries.
Well, this is what we're used to. We're
Yeah.
not used to the peace and the serenity. You know, we
Totally.
thrive in chaos because that's all we know.
Yeah.
And, you know, if my life wasn't chaotic and, you know, the screaming and yelling and the pain, I didn't know how to live. So
Totally.
good or bad, this is what I was used to. So yeah, coming into the rooms, you know, causing a scene or being, you know, like, you know, that person, because I know how to deal with that. I know how to deal with crazy. I know how to deal with crazy.
Yeah.
That's all I was used to. And it was all in my own mind. But honestly, I am so grateful for this gift and I don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
And I
It's so weird,
watch.
right? Like that idea of being like how the struggle to get sober, you know, for me was so many years. And then just like really for me, honestly, is about, you know, making that commitment and agreeing that no matter what, I'm going to stay
Yeah.
sober. And, you know, as you said, I just celebrated 20 years and a lot has happened
Of
within
course,
20
life happens, you know,
years.
life happens.
Well, I have to say, getting sober, like, I think that it can work. You know, I had 4 years of getting sober without the program. And I think that, you know, that process actually works for a lot of people.
Oh, it does. Oh, it does. I know a lot of people. I'm envious a little
Yeah.
bit.
What I've gotten from being in the program is, you know, it's like priceless. You know, the people I've met, I mean, I wake up with you every single morning with, you know, the text from you. It's the first
Today.
that when I turn on my phone after I meditate and I do my writing, I then go to my phone and turn on and get the text from you. And I've gotten that probably, how long has it been? 10
10
years?
years.
I
10.
mean, that's crazy. It's amazing. I appreciate that so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I love doing it. It's just part of my routine for the day.
Yeah.
It's part of my program. So you are this very talented photographer. How has that been for you since you've been, you know, sober? Like you can actually like really let your creative juices flow, I would assume.
Sure. I mean, you know, my relationship with my work and my art definitely has grown through being sober
Mm.
because, as I said before, I wasn't even able to take out a camera when I would go out because I'd be afraid of losing it. So first of all, like I was able to start carrying a camera around like at night and work on projects and actually follow through and commit to my art. And that's all through being sober. You know, like the tools that sobriety has given me, I use in every aspect of my life, whether it's like my work, my art, my marriage, you know, Giraffe, owning our shop in New York City, like everything that I do, it has really my relationships, my friendships, everything. Like the tools of the program are ingrained in me now. So it's hard, you know, I guess like once I got sober, slowly, I was able to start to produce work. And early on in my career, I had, you know, some success that, you know, I was only able to obtain because of being sober, because I showed up for it and I was able to even maneuver through all of the things that were happening for me.
Yeah.
And then there's also been a lot of loss and a lot of like disappointments in my career as well. And, you know, sobriety has helped me maneuver through that as well, you know, like comparing myself to others. And so it's like, you know, AA has really given me those tools to sort of like pull back and, you know, try not to be judgmental of myself, of other people. And it's not, you know, it hasn't been an easy ride for me, you know, but it's definitely been a process that I'm extremely grateful for, you know. And even during, you know, this quarantine, you know, my husband and I own a shop in New York City, and, you know, trying to keep that afloat and the doors open during this time has been really, really challenging. You know, it's interesting because Raph has, you know, a spiritual path and he has a spiritual program, and I have mine, and mine has been through AA, and he's not sober and he doesn't need to be, but it's interesting to see his growth in a spiritual way and how we can come together. And it really is that aspect of sobriety, of leaning into the spiritual part of the program, that continuously saves my ass over and over and over again. And that part of the program is something that when I first came in, whenever I heard the word God or people talking about it, it would like, I'd be out of there. So when I started like throwing chairs, started doing things, and, you know, all of that stuff, to like not be part of, you know, this cult, this, you know, religious thing. And, you know, I'm happy that today I don't view AA in that way. I think that AA, the rooms of AA, are probably the most spiritual places I've ever been. There's every, you know, religion, spiritual, every denomination that you can think of, you can find within the rooms. I love hearing people talk about what they believe in and their spiritual path. And that, for me, the shift came, you know, when I came in, people would say, make, you know, your higher power, whatever you need it to be, you know, it can be a doorknob, whatever, just don't make it another person. I used to be like, that crazy. I'm going to make a doorknob my higher power. And then I just realized that the grace in that, the beauty in that, is that you really can make it whatever you need it to be. And I've left room for that to change. You know, for me, I'm just going to tell this one story about spirituality and God and how I don't even think about it anymore. And it's, you know, from the first 8 years of my sobriety, it changed a lot. As I grew, my spirituality grew, my idea of God grew, my ability to just sort of like wear my spirituality loosely, my program loosely, and allow others to have their spiritual connection as well. But at 8 years of sobriety, I had been in a 10-year relationship, and that relationship came to an end. And that was probably one of the most painful experiences, other than my cousin Johnny dying, that I had to deal with getting sober. You know, we had an apartment in the city, a house upstate, car, dogs, money, success. And it all came crashing down. And it was so painful. I went up to Provincetown, and I was sitting on the beach, and I was thinking, praying to God, if you show me a whale, I know I can move here and that I'll be okay. Because I was in so much pain that I needed to get out of New York City. You know, I needed to get away because everyone knew me here in this relationship. And I knew I would see this person, and I just needed out. And I was so scared to leave New York City because it was like part of my identity. I'd been here, you know, everything, my career. So in 2008, I was sitting on the beach and I was praying, show me a whale, show me a whale. And I know that I'll be able to move here and I'll be okay. And then like a couple minutes later, a seal came by, and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's my sign. It's a seal. It's a seal. And like, it's actually something. That's my sign. And then a minute later, an orange life preserver came floating by. And I thought, that's your sign. You know, like, I'm so grandiose and egotistical. I asked to be shown a whale. And the only thing I needed was an orange life preserver to know you're okay. You know, I was scrambling and trying to hold on to the raft. I had put myself in the middle of this program and, you know, had sponsees and a sponsor. And I really felt like my life was falling apart, and that I was like holding on so hard. And I was praying, please just show me a sign that I'm going to be okay. And the sign was that I was okay, that there was an orange life preserver, and that I would always be taken care of if I remain on the raft of AA. And I continue to stay sober. And I've never questioned ever again that my connection with God, ever. And the other part of my relationship with God and spirituality came when I had a sponsor in LA, and he had me go through the big book and write down all these words that I didn't understand or that I wanted to know the meaning of. And the first word that I looked up was God. And the meaning that I read was the ultimate reality. And I thought, how the hell do you argue with that? Like, the ultimate reality, how amazing is that? Like, that's so right? Like, there's not even room for me to be like, question that.
Yeah.
So between those two experiences, I just like, I don't need to think about it, right? Like my mind is so small, like what I can think of could never even be as amazing as what God or whatever Buddha or Madonna, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
So that has left so much space for me to grow and expand into where my program even looser, which is, I love that. It's cool.
Mm, I do too. And I love you.
I love you.
I'm
Yeah.
so happy we did this together. I miss you.
I miss you, and I really appreciate you doing all of these talks too. It's been really nice to watch everybody and listen to everybody, and their stories, and to see Billy and Johnny and the
Mm,
people, people that I know from LA as well. It's been really touching.
I'm
So
so
cool.
glad that you're enjoying it. I love you to pieces. You
You
enjoy
too.
the rest of your day.
Too.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.